With over half of enterprise security budgets going towards detection and response in 2020, the challenge is investing in solutions that can migrate and scale with your business. ExtraHop helps security teams spot threats up to 95% faster and respond 60% more efficiently in hybrid and multi-cloud environments with cloud-native network detection and response. Kick the tires in the full product demo at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian. Join the Security Weekly mailing list for webcasts, virtual training announcements, and to receive your personal invite to our Discord server by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe and clicking the button to join the list. You can join the 170, 180 people online right now while we're doing the show, and almost 800 of your peers. Also, with all the recent changes to Black Hat and DEF CON, we realize we can keep doing what we do best, host virtual podcasts. I'm proud to announce Hacker Summer Camp 2020, a Security Weekly virtual live stream event, August 3rd to August 6th, 2020. Paul and I are going to be in studio all week, live streaming micro interviews, shows. If you want to reserve a slot now, visit securityweekly.com/summercamp 2020. All the options are up there. We update that every week or so based on our availability. But if you guys, anybody wants to do a sponsored interview, come on and do sponsor a show with us. Go there.
I'm curious if you're going to drive or fly.
So I am flying.
You are?
Because I can get back into Providence. Yeah, I checked the schedules this last
open
weekend.
Up a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I can actually I couldn't in June, but now that we're in July, I can actually get to Providence. I can get there in 2 flights, or 3, but 2. If I go through Dulles, I can get there. So I am planning on flying in maybe the week before. We'll see, but definitely going to be there the 3rd through the 6th.
Thought you were going to put in for a Security Weekly van or RV or something. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, do a cross-country trip.
What was it? John Madden used to do that, right? Because he was so traumatized by players were in a plane crash or something like that.
So he only takes a bus.
Yeah, took a bus everywhere.
Yeah. We could Kyle would love a minivan. We could get like a Security Weekly minivan and use that for all of our road trips. Yeah. Anybody who knows my son knows he loves sliding doors on the minivan. So, okay, let's get into some articles. I was going to go down funding articles. I said, let's stay on the theme of leadership communication. Both sides were a little light this week, but I got access to the CISO platform. And so I'm starting to get some news feeds come in. And so this first article is a good follow-up article to the session we did with Mark French a few weeks back. Remember, Mark came on and shared his security ladders with us about how to progress your career in InfoSec. And we talked about, okay, I'm a CISO, now what? Where do I go next? So Gary Hayslip, who used to be a customer of ours at Tenable, and he's been with a few different security companies around. He was with WebRoot prior to the acquisition. So, Gary's pretty well known in the industry. He put a blog post out specifically about, I'm a CISO, what's next? And he lays out some of the other opportunities for a CISO to continue to move their career forward if they want to get out of the CISO track. So I thought it was really good because it tied into part of that discussion we had with Mark, which includes things like being a CIO, which is Jason's path, right? Jason is now the CIO and CISO at Carousel Industries. That was kind of a growth path for him. It could be chief technology officer, chief risk officer, chief product officer. So there's lots of different paths. And Gary lays out kind of a description of each of these pathways for the CISO, which I thought was a really interesting way to break it down for folks.
Yeah, I don't think there's a shortage of paths. I think you get to choose your own adventure once you're a CISO. We talked about all those various options, and it just depends on where you want to go. I think it's one that's not here that I think is interesting is CEO, right? Maybe co-founder and CEO, as we see oftentimes, right? You want to delve back into the startup kind of realm. I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, if you look at the guys from Signal Sciences, for example, right?
Yeah.
They were on the security DevOps side and went and created their own company, right? And so that was a path for a few of them to move into kind of founder roles. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one.
Agreed.
Yeah. I had to cover this next article. Look, Qualys is a sponsor. I'm not going to make no bones about it. Ben Carr is a good friend. He used to report to me at Tenable. Ben was just appointed the Chief Information Security Officer at Qualys. I think this is a great move for him. He's been on both sides of the fence, right? He's been on the vendor side. He's been on the commercial side, the enterprise side. And so kudos
People
to
that
Ben.
reported to you at Tenable seem to do pretty well, Matt.
Depends on who you talk to. But
well, John from works for Google Cloud now, right?
Yep.
And Ben,
John Cheerhart. Yeah.
Myself.
You.
I think we're all doing pretty good.
Yeah. I hope so. Look, I've had the pleasure to work with some great people, and these guys, they know what they're doing. They're smart. Ben and I actually had a phone call about this position. I'm like, dude, yeah, you should go do it.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it happened.
Good advice.
Also, for those who are interested, we actually interviewed Ben on this show, Business Security Weekly number 120, 60 episodes ago. So anybody who wants to go see that interview with Ben, go check it out. We had an interesting discussion about the gaming industry, which was his previous role, vulnerability and prioritization and some of that stuff as a CISO. It's a great interview for anybody who wants to check it out. Okay, what CISO should tell the board about cybersecurity? So I think, as we all know, cybersecurity has taken a little more of a profile, especially with a lot of remote work and what's going on. And so there's a series of articles here that I pulled in this week around the board and really preparing the board, talking about aspects to the board. There's one here about reporting and metrics. I just thought it was interesting as the CISOs have to spend more time with the boards. What are some of the expectations? What are some of the things you have to be prepared for? And so these next three articles are really going to bring in aspects of the board level. So this first article is, what are the kind of the foundational elements for the board in cybersecurity? And so it kind of lays out some principles around, look, just give them the basics, right? Board members aren't very technical in most cases. They're usually financial folks. They could be in other leadership roles, but they may not have all the deep technical knowledge about security. So kind of stick to the basics and kind of level set your board and keep it at a really base level. Then it recommends talking about the process of security. A lot of times we want to gravitate towards products, not the process. And so with the board, talk about process. People, process, technology, right? And process typically helps you identify both the technology and the people resources you're going to need based on that process. And so, this article recommends kind of focus more on the process side. I have
I think to that point, I think spinning process as beneficial to the business. Just some of our previous conversations we've had on the shows, Matt, certainly speaks to, if we implement these new process is hard, right? But if we do that, it allows us to move faster and more securely, right? And I think, DevOps is one, and IT ops are adopting these processes that allow the business to move quickly while providing that aspect of security. But that aspect of security also, I think, speaks to performance and reliability as well. As I think this year especially, we've learned a lot of the techniques that we've been honing in on in security have positive impacts in other areas as well. Reliability, right?
Yeah. And here they really focus on monitoring, alerting, identification of potential attacks and breaches, right? Because if you think about what the board cares about, are we being breached? Is our data being breached? Do we have an incident that has so what is the process to help monitor and alert and make sure we're not in a breach scenario? I think is something that the board really wants to understand. And that's a lot of process pieces, because how you're monitoring, how you're doing the alerting, et cetera, are all parts of those processes. Plus, you've got emerging threats, right? As the workforce move from on-prem to remote, what's the new risk profile look like? How are we going to address some of those potential emerging risks now that people aren't in our network anymore? How are we going to analyze that? What's the process for bringing those up to the board level, for example, and discussing those and making decisions, right? Those are all parts of it. One of the recommendations, I'm not sure I like this one actually. It says reporting on specific incidents. I think incidents from maybe a lessons learned perspective are good, but I'm not sure you want to get into a lot of the details about an incident with the board members. I see that as potentially a trap that you kind of get in the weeds a little bit with the board members. I'm not sure that they fully could comprehend all aspects of the details. So maybe a lessons learned or something that recommendations that came out of it, maybe.
Yeah, it's hard. You're right. It's hard to describe an incident in a concise manner without delving into some of the technical details. I do like using an incident to highlight a strength and a weakness, right? If I had the time and I had to pick, I would choose one and be like, highlight what we're doing that's beneficial to the business. So highlight an incident that really wasn't an incident because we had certain things in place. And then talk about, well, where we did have more trouble and struggled and had a greater challenge was this incident. Therefore, here's the recommendation for, improvement based on the lessons learned, from both of those incidents, right? But that it does have a high potential of getting into the weeds.
Yeah. And that's what I don't want happening at the board level, because I think it opens a can of worms I don't think most people want to get into. And then the last tip here is obviously the report evolves. And it's true. I mean, what you report to the board is going to change over time and evolve. That ties into the second board article, which is, what are some of those reporting things that you want to give to the board? Now, this is a sponsored article. I'm just going to warn you now. But I thought there were some interesting takeaways in here about some of the things that you should report up to the board. Because when you think about security metrics, we've talked about metrics in the past. We've actually talked about with a few CISOs that didn't use metrics. They use more the maturity on something like the NIST cybersecurity framework instead of getting into very specific metrics. For example, Graham Cantu Park a couple weeks ago said, look, I don't use base metrics. I use kind of more of a maturity discussion around the NIST cybersecurity framework with my board. I don't get into specific metrics. But if you do metrics, this article actually gave you some really interesting metrics. Now, just exclude their screenshots, but there are some really interesting things here, like how do I measure the potential overall business risk? How do I bring different elements together in my cybersecurity program? Can I build out kind of an overall risk view for the board? Where are some of the business units or systems or applications that might carry a little more risk? Not getting into the specifics of number of vulnerabilities, number of incidents, et cetera, but can you measure and show kind of a risk matrix or a risk graph that says these are where I think we have risks in the business? Because then it allows you to have a risk discussion with the board and then ways to mitigate that risk. So I thought that was an interesting way. The other one was a custom dashboard around asset inventory. You can't protect what you don't know. So how well do you know your critical assets in the environment, right? It kind of feeds into the risk dashboard above. If you don't have a good asset inventory and understand the criticality of assets, how are you actually going to do a really good job of identifying where the potential risk is in the business? And I think this is one area that a lot of organizations struggle with is, do I have a good asset inventory? And then the last one is can I show some trends? Like, last month we were here, this month we're here, this quarter we're, show it over time. Do you see improvements, or do you see major shifts in different risks emerging? What does that mean from a reporting perspective? How are you trending? Because again, the board wants to see continuous improvement. So if you can demonstrate some of those trends, then you can show where improvement's happening, where it's not, and maybe that's a kind of a double-click focus area on areas that you need to address with the board. So I thought there were some good tips in there.
Awesome. I don't have anything to add to that. You covered it nicely.
And then the last article is the upside of virtual board meetings, because again, you're not seeing a lot of in-person board meetings right now. And so this article from Harvard Business Review talks about some of the things you should think about when it comes to a virtual board meeting. And again, prior to any board meeting, if you're a CISO or another member of the board, there's some pre-work that has to be done. Back to the metrics discussion and what are you going to show the board? Make sure you kind of pull all that data together. Because now in a virtual setting, how you display that information is going to be important. You're not in person anymore. And so you got to remember that being on a Zoom or a Skype link or a Teams link or whatever, you now have to figure out how to do that pre-work in a way that you can present it easily to everybody on the other end of the phone or on the other end of the link. So some pre-work there. It also gives you the ability to really shorten and focus the agenda. You can actually break up into subgroups. There's actually, I think one of the recommendations here is break it up into multiple sessions over a period of time. So maybe security has, its focus on a day, and there's a very specific group, a session on cybersecurity and risk and all the metrics, which then might break out into a couple different working groups, but you can spread them out now. You don't have to do them all on that day. So maybe security gets a little more focus in a virtual board meeting because now you can break it up into smaller sessions and get a little more focus. So just some really interesting tips here on how to drive a virtual board meeting.
I think it'd be interesting to replicate the dinner experience on a Zoom call.
I know. That's the one I couldn't figure out. I'm like, how do I do that? Right? I'm like, am I really going to sit there and eat in front of the
computer?
Zoom,
Yeah,
the computer.
It's kind of weird. I would recommend not to do that.
Yeah, that's the one thing I can't do. Yeah, it's not good to watch me eat live. So that's I don't think you want to broadcast.
No one wants to see anyone eat live.
Yeah. Okay, next article is on some of the emerging cybersecurity trends for the rest of 2020. Now, this is aspects from Gartner, and I thought there was some the graphic in here. I tried to embed it into the, I couldn't save it in the format that I wanted, but the graphic speaks to me where the market's moving, right? So Gartner says they're expecting spending on InfoSec to grow at about 2.4% to nearly 124 billion, but it had originally projected 8.7% growth. So first of all, we're going to see a shrink in growth by almost a factor of 4, which I think is interesting, right?
But that's just Gartner's prediction. But
correct.
How accurate has that been in the past?
It's been pretty accurate. And so I think they are definitely seeing a slowdown in spend. What is more interesting is the graphic right underneath it on where is the spending going to boost, right? So you're gonna boost spending in certain areas and you're gonna pull it back in other areas. And the top 5, I think, are music to my ears.
Yep. It's apps, users, data, and cloud.
It's app, user, data,
and cloud crosses all those areas, right?
Exactly
in addition to DevOps and
Yep. Cloud security is number 1, data security, application security, identity access management, and then infrastructure protection are the top 5 boosts in spending, all above 5% growth over previous. Cloud security is a 33% increase in spend.
Well, because it's still the shiny new hotness, right? I mean, operating systems, applications, web development, and then we'd had virtualization. And now it's really cloud, right? And that's where security is largely lacking and not understood well enough. So that's where we're going to see the growth.
Yep.
I think it follows previous trends.
Oh, yeah.
in different
And
areas.
the biggest loser is network security equipment, down 12.6%. Because if I don't have employees in the office and I'm moving stuff to the cloud and I'm supporting remote, I don't have to make a bunch of network security investments.
Network security took a double whammy, right? In the advent of cloud and now work from home.
Yep, it definitely. And so these are the shifts you're seeing, and it'll be interesting. I mean, anybody in these top few spaces, this is why I love app user data. They transcend. Regardless of where the worker is, these are things you have to address as a security professional, and you're seeing it in the growth numbers too. Yeah. And my last article, I had to throw this one in there. Majority of security pros fed up with alert fatigue. We talk about it a lot. This is just some of the limitations of the SIM. This is, again, it's a sponsored article, but I think what's interesting here is that is we continue to try to address the shift. We also have to think about how to provide better alerting capabilities, better false positive analysis. How do we get our arms around the SOC in a remote world? I think there's still a lot of challenges there. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how things play out over the next few months. But I don't think anybody's surprised with the numbers that are in this report that the SOC is just overwhelmed with alerts.
Well, yeah, always has been.
Always has been.
It's interesting. Innovations in technology have really just bred more alert fatigue because we get more alerts from more places.
Right. This is why
the analytics have picked up, and I think if there's a subset of vendors that do allow you to cut through that sea of alerts, right? But it's still a subset.
Yeah, but you've now got to do correlation of other activities to weed out the false positives from the events that matter. Then you have to figure out how to prioritize those alerts in a way to really look for what should I really focus on and not focus on. I mean, a lot of the other topics that we talk about, but as a CISO, I mean, I think this gets challenging, right? It's because you don't want to burn out your SOC analysts. You want to provide them better processes, better analytics to help them really manage these alerts in an effective way, and then take in the whole aspect of the remote aspect of what's going on in the world. How do you make this easier to respond and address some of these alerts? So some good data in there. Again, it's a sponsored article, but I thought it was definitely something interesting for people to read.
Awesome.
And with that, I think that's it. Thanks, Paul, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening, and we'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.